Lego was built with one core concept in mind: pure creativity and the art of creation itself. Everyone's pretty familiar with the concept, whether you played with Lego as a kid or you were introduced to the brand through the various games and shows. Now, allow me to say, what would a movie about Lego even be about? How do you tackle a concept that can be both so grand and so out there all at once? Simple. You take all those ideas and make the most honest movie you can out of it. Usually in these videos I go into detail about the background of the thing I'm talking about, but Lego has such a large history. I feel like if I did that, it would make the video much larger than it actually needed to be. But I do have a very special connection with this movie. I was about 12 when this movie came out. I didn't go into theaters at the time because where I was living didn't have any theaters nearby unless you wanted to drive about an hour to get there. It wasn't until about a year later, in the 7th grade I think, when I saw this movie. And pun unintended, it all just clicked together for me. Middle school was a seriously rough time in my life. I won't get too into that because it's my personal business and I'm not really comfortable with sharing that with random strangers online. But yeah, this film was one of those few pieces of media that gave me some relief throughout those rough few years. And honestly, I've always loved Lego, though I couldn't always afford them. Yeah, despite what they say now, Lego has always been very expensive. But I still got some really fun smaller sets in my childhood. I have no idea where they're at in my room currently, but I had a few Star Wars battle packs from the Clone Wars cartoon, and I'm pretty sure I had a Guardians of the Galaxy Nova Corps ship, because I loved the Guardians of the Galaxy as a kid. And side tangent, I seriously think those are some of the best films of the last decade or so. I genuinely think it's one of the best trilogies of all time, and I think those films will be classics in the future. But besides that, speaking of classics, I think the Lego movie could easily fit into that category too. In a way, I see this movie as setting a lot of precedents for what would be the future of animation, and we didn't even pick up on it. Many of the people who worked on this film, including the directors, would later work on the Spider-Verse films, which are basically the biggest blueprint for 3D animated movies since, like, Shrek in 2001. Maybe that's a massive claim to make, but I think I've made it clear by now that I'm super attached to this film. With all the preamble out of the way, let's get into the production history of this film. Before we get any further, my analytics tell me that about 95% of my viewers aren't subscribed. Look, I don't really like when YouTubers do this either, but maybe think about subscribing if you like the video, and check out some of my other videos too. I'm hoping to at least make it past the 500 subscriber mark soon, and I hope you can help me do that. It genuinely helps and makes me happy because I don't really make money on these videos whatsoever. They're mostly just done as a passion project, but if I could make money on these videos and you'd help me get there, I'd really appreciate it. And hey, maybe once I hit about 1,000 subscribers, I'll try and make a big special video. But sorry for the interruption. On with the video. From researching and watching the behind the scenes, it seems like the cast and crew had a lot of fun creating this film. There seemed to be this productive but also playful feeling to the way everyone talked about making this film, which tends to be a pretty good sign. I mean, if you absolutely hated the thing you were working on, I think it'll come out worse than you'd like it to. Of course, that's just from my personal experience. I doubt that's the same for everyone. The directors of this film are the sensational duo of Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Maybe to those who don't know these two's history, it sounds like I'm saying something a little bit out there, but these guys genuinely have a great track record that goes pretty far back. This might be one of the most slept on filmographies in a while. Just to put it out there, these two worked on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, the 21 Jump Street films, Clone High, and the Spider-Verse films, amongst many other things. This film's animation style is a unique blend of stop-motion animation with 3D CGI elements. The CGI is mostly used to animate the characters' mouths, facial expressions, and so on, whereas a lot of the movements and broader animation is done with a lot of traditional stop-motion. They intentionally went out of the way to give the film a homemade look like many of the stop-motion Lego shorts you'd find online. I think Chris Miller says it the best. The idea was to take a homemade stop-motion Lego brick film and try and make that as cinematic as possible, with lighting and camera angles and the type of things that you would do on a big-budget live-action film. I couldn't have said it any better myself, so it's safe to say that almost everything you see in this film is made out of official Lego bricks. But what animation studio would have the creativity and the courage to animate all of this, well, Lego? Well, they got the iconic studio Animal Logic. You know, I could go on a whole segment about how they're one of the most important animation and effects studios of all time, but all I really have to tell you is they did all the CGI for The Matrix, and also they worked on my beloved Farscape. They also did work on Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, some of the Harry Potter films, many MCU films, and many, many others. But I think making the effects for The Matrix alone will give any studio reserved space in film history. I'll put it to you like this. If there's a film that has any CGI work done in it, it's about a 60% chance it's either done by Animal Logic or Industrial Light and Magic. They animated and designed many elements of this movie in a few ways. When they designed many of the characters, vehicles, environments, and all sorts of things, they would place it into an in-house made program that allowed them to first use every cataloged Lego brick to see if this thing could actually be made in real life. They also went on great lengths to not cheat and make sure that it could be made with Lego bricks. Of course, there are a few examples where they would build something with real bricks or draw it out first before getting it simulated. After this design process though, they would usually build it in real life, or have something molded if it was a special minifigure they needed. Speaking of minifigures, the first one they had designed was Emmett. In fact, he was actually the first character they designed for the whole film. The ethos of this decision being, if they made the most normal, unassuming character first, then it'd be easier to make the wackier character stand out better from him. You know, it's kind of crazy to think about because that implies there's an original Emmett minifigure out there in the world, and those 4 centimeters of plastic probably cost much more than it cost to actually make. Anyway, many of the animators would first do 2D animated mock-ups of scenes, just to make sure that the jokes landed properly, which is very common to do in most 3D animated films, but are usually done in the form of animatics, which are super simplified short animations. When it comes to the voice actors in the film, they casted a wide assortment of comedians and comedic actors, some of which are more famous than others, though it's kind of insane to think at one point Chris Pratt wasn't a major Hollywood name. He was mostly known for starring in Parks and Recreation before getting onto the Lego Movie. At the time, Will Ferrell was the biggest star in this film. But if this was done now, Pratt would be the selling star. All the VAs said that working with Lord and Miller was smooth and a fun process. They allowed a lot of room for improv, but still stuck pretty closely to their original script and premise, which explains the very natural delivery of the film at times. However, with all the research out of the way, does this film still keep itself together? Let's find out. I think the first thing that is apparent about this movie is that the animation is gorgeous. This is still one of the most unique animated films to this day, and it helps that all the animation is so smoothly put together. Sure, some of the movements are jittery and stilted here and there, but that's intentional since they're trying to make it look like a Lego home video. In fact, I'd say this movie knows when to have barely any animation at all, and it still either looks good or lands as a great visual gag. The best example of that being Vitruvius' ghost just floating on a string. It's clever how they kept in little imperfections like glare on a camera or animation to give it a grounded feeling. I feel like the only other studio that embraced that aspect of filmmaking into their style was Pixar in their earlier years. For example, they kept little bits of the characters like fingerprints or bits of wear and tear or even little painting mistakes to make all the characters feel like real minifigs. I think the best feat of animation throughout this whole movie is whenever a character is building something. I mean, come on, just look at how smoothly they animate all the pieces clicking together and forming into a full piece. It's masterful animation. I don't know if they did this with CGI or stop motion, but it's beautifully done either way. On another note, the humor of this movie holds up surprisingly well. That was the one thing I was afraid of not holding up. Part of me felt like it was going to be very early 2010s style of humor, if you get what I mean. You know, the very law random or epic style of humor. And I'm glad it wasn't that. It's very absurdist a lot of the time, mixed in with very well-paced interactions between characters. It's pretty much similar to the style of humor you find in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, so if you like the humor in that movie, then you'll like the humor here too. Another aspect that works really well for this movie is the music. It has such a different sound from most of the movies you'd hear back then, and probably even by today's standards. It mixes in a lot of elements of more dubstep-ish electronic music with a lot of traditional orchestral elements, which I should say is a feat because I typically tend to dislike a lot of dubstep. I tend to lean more towards house music, dance music, and jungle, so color me surprised that I was bopping my head to parts of the OST. Hell, I'd even say the big pop song made for this movie is a major success. On every level, Everything Is Awesome is crafted to be absolutely obnoxious, like a lot of early 2010s pop songs if we're being honest, but it somehow works. It teeters that line just nicely enough to be comedic, but never enough to make me actively want to turn it off. Apparently, the composer of this film is Mark Mothersbaugh, who has a great track record. He's worked on other Chris Lord and Phil Miller films, Wes Anderson films, the Minecraft movie, but he's worked on video games too. The Crash Bandicoot trilogy, Jak and Daxter, Sims 2, Ratchet & Clank. Not gonna lie, this guy should be talked about more. I always see people talk about Michael Giacchino, and trust me, Giacchino deserves to be in discussion as one of the best film composers of all time with people like John Williams, but Mothersbaugh should at least be discussed too with how great his track record is. The story of this film is masterfully crafted, and it's paced incredibly well. It never sits on any one beat too long, but also knows exactly how long to stretch a scene to dig at what they're trying to say, or maybe lay out some proper subtext. I can't really name a single scene in this whole movie where I thought it should have been cut to save time or because I didn't really see any purpose in it happening. Even the jokes, which, still hilarious, tend to be used more so to explore the characters and how they interact on top of being just funny. Speaking of the characters, every character in this movie is great. Everyone is super charming, but no one is the absolute good guy or the ultimate moral being. They all have their own little flaws and shortcomings, and while some characters grow out of theirs, not everyone does. Even Vitruvius, who is presented as the traditional wise mentor figure, is presented with some fun personality quirks and is even revealed to have lied about the prophecy. It was done for a good reason, but they introduced enough character complications between all the characters to allow for a better story. I think the character who has the best arc throughout the whole film is Emmett. It helps that Emmett is meant to be the pusher of the plot, as well as presenting the integral themes and concepts of the story. But he's also just a likable character that we want to see succeed. He tries his best throughout most of the movie to just be himself and be as creative as he can be, despite the fact that at most spots in the movie everyone questions him and even belittles him. Which is funny how much the characters crap at him for his ideas when the double-decker couch literally saves everyone. The best scene that encapsulates all of this is the scene where Emmett learns about how people around him feel about him. It genuinely hurts and works as a perfect starting point for Emmett's motivation. It hits like a brick to the stomach for the audience, or maybe it just hits me that way because I related to it maybe too much as a kid. But enough of that. The movie digs into its themes perfectly. The movie has, at least from what I gather from watching it, two central themes. The first one is obvious, that being creativity. The movie goes into how everyone has a creative side to themselves. Maybe it doesn't show itself in the traditional sense, but you shouldn't try to just trample over someone else's creativity, because creativity and imagination adds to our world and helps us create another one. But the second theme, and the one I feel like a lot of people might miss on first viewing, is the importance of play and imagination, especially in your childhood. This is explored through the character interactions between Will Ferrell's father character, aka the man upstairs, and the child, whose name is Finn, playing with his dad's Lego bricks, but also is an in-universe allegory between Emmett and Lord Business. We see throughout the movie how Finn tends to feel bad about his father stifling his creativity and keeping the vast collection of Lego to himself, which, might I add here, if the man upstairs didn't want his Lego collection touched, then why didn't he just put it in a case? But anyways, instead of the movie taking the cliche route of Finn lashing out at his father and getting angry, we see him use his imagination play out his emotions. He explores how he feels in a healthy manner, and I can assume that it's probably therapeutic for him too. This theme meets its logical endpoint when the father sees his son's creations. At first, he reacts with anger and frustration, thus further upsetting his son. But eventually, he comes around when he sees the minifigure that looks like him turns out to be the bad guy. And that's when it all clicks. He realizes that by holding back his son's imagination, he was harming his son. And then he changes his approach and does what a proper parent should do: encourage your child's strengths. And his son clearly has a talent for building Lego and storytelling from what we can gather from the narrative of the film. And when you think about it, isn't that what Lego has always been about? Making these sorts of connections, stories, and ways to connect with other people? Sure, the bricks literally connect to each other, but also look at the massive community around Lego. Lego feels like this one-of-a-kind company. A company built on allowing people to be as creative as they want, and not having to follow any instructions. In a world that I swear is becoming more and more corporatized by the day, where we live in a borderline corporate dystopia, where we're being directed to buy and buy and buy outside of our means, it feels great that there's at least people that can take the tools that these companies give them and use them to make something that adds to their existence. Not saying that Lego is beyond being overly expensive, they have their own faults too, but a company incentivizing people to do what they want with what they buy? I mean, it's practically unheard of nowadays. And while they have their issues, I can at least respect that Lego is trying to teach people to use their minds and explore. And I especially appreciate the Lego movie for showing people how important creativity can be, because it could have easily been a cynical cash grab made for money. But they didn't do that. They decided to make it so much more. And that, in my eyes, will always be appreciated. And with all that being said, do you agree with me? Do you not? Well, if you did or didn't, I'd like to hear what you gotta say. So please like, subscribe, share, comment, and so much more. I genuinely would appreciate it. With all that being said, I'll see you next time.